Resurrection Sunday last week, I hope everyone got a big dose of the good news, because most of what followed for the rest of the last week was not so good. What's left of Iran's regime is refusing to open the Strait of Hormuz, despite demands by President Trump and increasingly desperate pleas from dozens of countries around the world, including some of Tehran's friends. Several missiles, rockets, and drones have hit Israel this week, causing extensive damage and casualties, which makes us angry but doesn't intimidate us. Meanwhile, the ground campaign against Hezbollah in Lebanon is continuing with very little reporting by the international media, and Israelis are watching with increasing concern as anti-Semitism continues to be a major issue globally. All that and much more is just ahead on this week's edition of VFI News from Israel. Well, friends, since I mentioned Resurrection Sunday in the introduction, let's start with some more good news. We'll save some for the end, like always, but in between, I'm afraid it's mostly grim and worse. But to start with, Israel and the United States cooperated this past week to rescue a crewman who had to bail out of his F-15E strike aircraft after it was hit by Iranian fire in the skies over western Iran. The pilot of the aircraft was rescued very quickly, but the radar intercept officer was badly wounded and forced to hide for a few days in the mountainous terrain near where he bailed out. Assisted by intelligence provided by Israel, the American Special Forces teams went in and rescued him while losing two C-130 transport aircraft that were unable to take off again because their tires couldn't get any traction in the sandy terrain. In order to avoid these aircraft being captured by the enemy, the U.S. forces destroyed them. Wow. Speaking in my capacity as an American taxpayer, that last part stings a little bit, but these things happen in war. The U.S. military has sustained 15 fatalities so far, and the Air Force has lost at least 7 manned aircraft as well as 9 unmanned drones. Several U.S. bases in the region have also been hit, resulting in the loss of radar systems and other assets. President Trump is reportedly asking Congress for a $200 billion supplemental addition to the defense budget to pay for all this and to replenish the depleted stocks of cruise missiles, air defense interceptors, and all other gear that is being expended in this conflict. Now, this is coming at a time of increasing economic hardship for many Americans, and it's making this war fairly unpopular among American voters. With the midterm congressional elections coming up in November, it is absolutely imperative for President Trump to be able to declare victory during this war. Now, that will not be easy because in this modern age, clear-cut victories are hard to come by. It's not like back in World War II where the Soviet troops raised their flag above the Reichstag building in Berlin, and that let everyone know the war was over and which side had won and which side had lost. Those days are over, my friends, and it's beginning to look like this war against Iran will end with both sides claiming that they have won, although honestly, Iran has clearly lost a lot and some very important national assets. Now, getting back to the good news theme, this last week Iran lost some more valuable assets, including IRGC intelligence chief Major General Majid Khamenei. Another senior IRGC operative reportedly terminated this past week was Asghar Bagheri, the commander of the 840th Quds Force Unit. These two IRGC big shots join a long-growing list of senior terrorist operatives who have gotten their comeuppance in this war. Now, I can't pronounce the names of most of them, so I won't even try, but just the sheer length of this list of names is impressive in any language. In this context, it is also notable that the so-called supreme leader of Iran, Mujtaba Khamenei, is believed by U.S. and Israeli intelligence to totally be out of the picture. According to these reports, he is in the Shiite holy city of Qom, receiving medical treatments for the wounds he suffered from the airstrikes that took out his father and so many other senior regime figures in the opening minutes of this war on February 28th. Now, I'm not a doctor, and I never even played one on TV, although it would have been nice, but I'm going to throw out a guess here that if he's still in such bad shape 5 weeks after being hit that he has to be sedated most of the time and can't communicate regularly, then he is very unlikely to ever recover enough to take on the full-time job of ruling Iran. Now that leaves us with a big open question about who really is in charge there. If, as President Trump says, America is negotiating with the regime, who in the regime even has the authority to conduct such negotiations, which must surely include concessions? Who has the authority? Or at this point, maybe we should ask, who even has the ability to open the Strait of Hormuz? If the IRGC troops manning the anti-ship missiles and drones that are deployed on the Iranian side of the strait get an order from someone to stand down, will they obey that order? What happens if they get an order from someone to stand down, but then they get another order from someone else to keep firing? These are not unlikely scenarios. Now on Tuesday, President Pezeshkian, whom I'm starting to feel sorry for, said that he and 13 other million Iranians were ready to die as martyrs defending the Islamic Revolution. But according to reports in the opposition media portals, he also accused the IRGC of sacrificing the Iranian economy and the future of the country on the altar of continuing a war they know is already lost. Now, these reports came just a few hours before President Trump's deadline for the regime to either open the Strait of Hormuz or he would order the destruction of all the power plants and other critical infrastructure in Iran. Even before this, President Trump has said, in what might be an attempt to set the stage for a declaration of victory, that there has already been regime change in Iran since so many of these senior mullahs and IRGC generals have been eliminated. There is some truth to that, but I'm afraid it's also somewhat deceptive, because although there has been a change in regime personnel, there has not been an appreciable change in the regime's behavior. They are continuing to refuse to surrender, which common sense says is their only good option, especially after the massive American attacks on infrastructure this last week. Now let us take a moment to recall that Iran's economy and physical infrastructure was in very bad shape even before this war started. Remember a few months ago when we were talking about the dams that supply water to the capital city of Tehran, as well as several other major cities being catastrophically low? Remember when we were talking about Tehran having the worst air quality of any major city in the world according to the UN? These problems are still there, and they've probably gotten much worse. Whatever regime is ruling over Iran a few months from now is going to have to cope with those problems, and many other problems that will result from ongoing Israeli and American airstrikes. On the other side of that equation, here in Israel, we're continuing to absorb damage and casualties from Iranian missiles, Hezbollah rockets and drones, and the occasional ballistic missile attack from the Houthis in Yemen. This past week, the Feast of Unleavened Bread ended, but most schools did not resume in-class learning, instead continuing to hold distance learning via Zoom meetings. Ben Gurion International Airport also remains effectively shut down, although a limited number of flights by Israeli airlines are continuing, with small numbers of passengers on outgoing flights and much larger numbers of passengers arriving on incoming flights. These are the thousands of Israelis who were caught outside the country when the war started and who have struggled to get home. A heavier volume of incoming and outgoing flights are theoretically possible at Ramon International Airport, which is just north of Eilat in the southern Arava Desert region. But this airport does not have the same large capacity that Ben Gurion has and even did. It is also a theoretical target for ballistic missiles coming from the Houthis, and it could be targeted by Iranian-backed Shiite missiles in Iraq. A whole war within the larger war is going on in Iraq these days, and it includes airstrikes by both Israeli and American aircraft on these Iranian-backed militias. Clashes have also been reported between the militias and Baghdad regime troops and Kurdish militias in the north as well. I hope this doesn't bore you, but this is what's happening in the Middle East. This battle has received little attention by the international media, but it's happening, and it could flare up much more dramatically if the Iranian regime wanted to try and distract attention from their own problems. Well, here at VFI News, we'll keep an eye on that for you. In the meantime, the regime continues to carry out what I'd call harassing fire at Israel, launching small barrages of between 1 to 5 missiles a few times a day in an effort to compel Israelis to run to shelters. This is meant to keep everyone on edge, disrupt work and other routines, and just in general wear us down. Now, on this note, I have to switch briefly to commentary mode because, as I've said many times before, the Iranian regime lies to everyone, but mostly they lie to themselves. For years, they've been confidently declaring that Israelis are weak, cowardly, and overly reliant on the United States. This narrative holds that if Israel gets hit hard enough, it'll collapse with the IDF defeated, the government in shambles, and the general population stampeding for the airports in a panicked bid to flee before we're all massacred. Never so farther than the truth. Once again, the regime and its allies in Hamas and Hezbollah repeated this narrative so many times that they managed to talk themselves into believing it. But nothing could be farther from the truth, my friends, and like all false narratives, it has had devastating consequences for the people who pushed it and everyone else. Iran's self-deceit has compelled the regime to fire most of its missiles at Tel Aviv and other Israeli civilian population centers instead of IDF bases. If they'd fire a few more missiles at the IDF might have a harder time bombing them to smithereens. So I'm glad they're not doing that. But of course, it's not easy seeing the Home Front Command digging the lifeless bodies of Israeli grandparents out of the rubble that used to be their apartment buildings because there was no protected rooms in those old buildings. It's also difficult to see the widespread damage from cluster munitions, which the IRGC is firing at civilian areas in violation of international law. The Iranians don't care about that. Now, these munitions can't penetrate the walls of a shelter or protected room, but once again, many Israelis don't have any such shelter or protected room close to their homes. Here at Vision for Israel, we've placed hundreds of portable safety shelters in communities all over Israel for Jews, Arabs, Christians, and all kinds of other people who have been saved from death or serious injury because of these shelters, and we would like to place many, many more. But for that, we need your help because rockets and drones are also coming into Israel from the Hezbollah terror militia in Lebanon. However, most of the rockets that Hezbollah is firing these days are being fired from north of the Litani River, and they're being directed at IDF troops who have been deployed on the Lebanese territory south of the Litani. These rockets have caused several fatalities and injuries among IDF troops, but Hezbollah has reportedly suffered over 1,000 fatalities and has many, many more wounded. The leadership of Hezbollah at this point consists mostly of IRGC officers who have also sustained heavy losses. It's not clear how much longer these top-heavy organizations can continue, but we must not get overconfident as the lower-level membership of Hezbollah has proven surprisingly resilient, continuing to fire rockets even without direct orders from higher up the chain of command. However, the pace of fire into Israeli border communities by anti-tank missiles and heavy machine guns has dropped off considerably since IDF ground forces have pushed Hezbollah back away from the border. Sadly, Israel has also needed to destroy the Dahia neighborhood of Beirut and most of the villages and structures that were still standing on the Lebanese side of the border. This means that more than 1 million Shiite residents of these areas who have crowded into northern Lebanon will have nowhere to go when this war is over. Now, honestly, folks, it's terrible for the innocent, but they've been supporting Hezbollah for decades, joining in their chants of death to Israel and so on. It's no fun facing the consequences of your mistakes, which is why, as I sometimes have occasion to tell my grandchildren, it's better not to make mistakes in the first place. Speaking of consequences for mistakes, there have also been reports of increased tensions between them and other factions within Lebanon. Although the internationally recognized government of this country, Lebanon, took the step of declaring Iran's ambassador persona non grata, he refused to leave the country, confirming what many have long believed about the Islamic Republic's contempt for Lebanon's sovereignty. It is my happy duty to report to you that Argentina also declared Iran's charge d'affaires in Buenos Aires persona non grata on April 2nd. I hope more countries have the courage and moral clarity to take similar actions going forward. It's the least they can do, especially those countries that always criticize Israel for so-called, quote, human rights violations, unquote. But they had nothing to say when the regime massacred tens of thousands of protesters in January in Iran. But getting back to Hezbollah, no matter what happens regarding the war against Iran, I believe Hezbollah is all but finished as an organized fighting force in Lebanon. The rockets they're firing at IDF troops in Galilee communities this past week are their last gasp, and even that might soon stop. Circling back to the idea that there's already been a change of regime in Iran, the new guys who are nominally in charge there now might not want to keep spending money on Hezbollah. They've watched it utterly fail to do anything Iran needed it to do over the past 2.5 years of this war, while other groups, particularly the Houthis in Yemen, have performed slightly better from Iran's perspective. The situation has also changed because Iran has lost its direct land corridor to Hezbollah since the al-Jolani regime has aggressively moved against them in Syria. So what I think I'm going to start calling the regime of new guys in Tehran might decide to cut their losses and walk away from Hezbollah. I certainly hope so. That's just speculation on my part, but I think there are some excellent reasons to hope that it goes that way. However, although Hezbollah has not managed to affect the IDF's ability to strike Iran, it has managed to do tremendous damage to Israel's economy, particularly in the Galilee and Golan region. Direct damage to border communities from rocket and missile fire between October 8, 2023 and the end of 2024 in November amounted to around 1.5 billion shekels according to Israel Insurance Institute. This includes damage from fires that started because of rockets and debris from interceptions that landed in wooded areas or farmland. Finally, there's the economic damage that this region has suffered because it is heavily dependent on tourism, specifically Christian pilgrimage. The same thing has happened in the Red Sea resort city of Eilat, which has been and now is once again under attack from the Houthis in Yemen and threatened by Shiite militias in Iraq. Needless to say, many people in the center of the country are also struggling under the difficult circumstances that have accompanied this war. So here at Vision for Israel, we're working hard to provide some relief to families and communities in Israel. And while we're on the subject of helping Israel, I want to encourage you to make a plan to come visit us as soon as it's safe to do so in the nation of Israel. The Galilee is, after all, the part of the Holy Land where Yeshua grew up and where most of his earthly ministry took place. There are historic churches built on many of the traditional spots where he performed miracles, including the village of Cana, where he turned water into wine, and Tabcha, where he fed the 5,000 with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. For centuries, Christians have visited these sites, but in the last few years that flow has slowed into a tiny trickle, and many jobs that used to depend on these visitors have totally disappeared. This has also happened in Jerusalem, where the economy is also heavily dependent on Christian pilgrims. So if you're wondering how you can bless Israel in this time of trouble, one of the best ways to do that is to bless yourself by coming next year to see the land of the Bible for yourself. And while you're here, I encourage you to visit the body of Messiah in Israel as well. We're not hard to find, and more people are attending our fellowships every week, including many tourists, but also native-born Israelis, both Jewish and Arab alike. We hope to see you in Israel soon. Well, I wasn't asked to say any of this by the Ministry of Tourism or anyone else, by the way. I'm saying it on my own initiative, so God bless you for listening to me. Now, we're almost out of time for this week's report, so let's just quickly go over some other big stories for this week, starting with some things that happened outside of Israel. On Tuesday, there was an apparent terrorist attack on the Israeli consulate building in Istanbul, Turkey, resulting in 1 fatality and 2 others wounded. The diplomatic staff there had been evacuated shortly after the Swords of Iron war began, but it remained as a symbol of Israeli presence in Turkey, which has become increasingly hostile towards the Jewish state. As I often say, I've never claimed to be a prophet, but I'm going to make a prediction. Turkey and the Muslim Brotherhood networks all across the Middle East and North Africa that its sponsors are going to be Israel's next big problem after this war with Iran is over. Another big problem we're all dealing with is the massive increase in anti-Semitic attitudes in Western countries, including the United States. According to the New York Police Department, over half of the religiously inspired hate crimes in New York City this last year were directed against the Jewish community. In the United Kingdom, public schools have become a hotbed for anti-Semitic attitudes, and Jewish students increasingly report being bullied by classmates and, in some cases, even by teachers and staff. Other reports speak of the increasing number of so-called lone wolf kinetic attacks on synagogues, Jewish community centers, and Jewish-owned businesses. Needless to say, this is motivating many Jewish people from all over the world and also many Israelis who have been living abroad to consider making Aliyah. And this is good news, and I'll be ending this week's report with that. So here at Vision for Israel, we have a long-standing program to assist immigrants in the various stages of Aliyah, and there are various stages, and none of them are easy. The first part, where people arrive at the airport and get off the plane while everyone crowds around them, giving them flowers, blowing them kisses and making speeches and playing music and all that, lasts for a few hours. The pictures and videos from these few hours get used by the different groups involved in Aliyah for fundraising and publicity, and that's all fine and good. But when the arrival party is over, the real work begins, my friends. People need a place to live, food to eat, etc. Most of them arrive in Israel not speaking Hebrew, and they need classes to learn the basics before they can get a job. If they come at a young enough age, they get drafted into the IDF, and if they're blessed to have a good experience there, they usually come out speaking pretty decent Hebrew and having a few other skills which might help them get a job. But friends, the point I'm trying to make here is that new immigrants need a lot of help when they first arrive in this country, and most of them continue to need a lot of help for a long time after they get here. Please visit visionforisrael.com and click on the Projects tab to see how you can help out with this vitally important project. Well, with that, I'm Barry Siegel, and this has been another edition of VFI News from Israel. God bless you all out there. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. They shall prosper that love thee.